The journey begins. One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all. And in the darkness bind them. Ooh, I've always wanted to say that. If we take this next step to talk about Lord of the Rings in a series on science fiction, is it really the furthest from our thematic home we've ever been? I'm not so sure. Mainly because of how it influenced later science fiction authors. Not only would you be hard-pressed to find a sci-fi author that hasn't read it, but there are so many conventions that have become staples of the genre that first worked their way into our minds with Lord of the Rings that sometimes we forget about them. And one of these conventions comes right at the beginning. Okay, not at the very beginning with the Song of Anur, but at the beginning of Lord of the Rings itself, at a long-expected party. The opening chapter of the book sees Bilbo preparing for a grand party for his 11st birthday, at the end of which he'll disappear, both literally and figuratively, from the Shire. But before he leaves, he passes the One Ring along to Frodo. This is a symbolic and thematic act that not only determines the course of the book, but helps us understand something Tolkien wants to explore: the passing of generations, the handing of the world from one generation to the next. All of the Lord of the Rings has a melancholy to it, a sad, wistful feel. And this theme of passing on is one of the principal reasons. As we see here, and as we see a few chapters later with the elves heading west and leaving Middle-earth for good, in the schema of Lord of the Rings, for the next generation to come into its own and take its turn helming the world, the previous generation has to leave, has to bow out of the story. But before passing that torch, they need to present what gifts they have, what they've acquired along the way to help those who come after them. Some of those gifts are actually burdens, like the ring. Some are earnest gifts, like a coat of mithril or the elf stones. And some are keepsakes, like the box of soil that will grow the last Malorn tree. But in passing along these gifts, the previous generation is also trying to pass on a piece of their world. A world that can't exist anymore. A world that has to crumble and be reshaped by the next generation so they can make it their own. And in truth, the whole tale is about one generation of the world struggling to put right the errors of the past that they inherited. But rather than making it quite so black and white, Tolkien also gives us the last remnants of the previous generation, and shows some of them coming to realize how much harm their complacency has caused, and using their parting days trying to help correct it. This theme of passing the baton, of the change of generations, was really first brought to the fore in genre fiction by Tolkien. Before him, and perhaps the shattered time he lived through, this didn't come up in sci-fi or fantasy. But as Tolkien brought it to us, he brought with him another theme which has become a staple of science fiction: the diminishing of generations. Being a great scholar of mythology, Tolkien latched onto a theme common in many myth cycles, and especially prevalent in Greek myth: the lessening of the world. The idea that the world goes through ages, and as these ages pass, a certain vitality passes out of the world. That lives become shorter, heroes become less powerful, and people become more focused on the material world, rather than whatever spiritual or magical world may surround it. We see this with the elves. We see this with the lessening of the lives of the Númenórean kings. We see this in a realm where the dark powers were once thrown back by great armies, but now all hope rests on one from the least of the sentient races. And in exploring this idea, he borrows heavily not only from the Greek ages of man, but, especially with the Númenóreans, from his own Old Testament background, where lifespans fall from Methuselah's venerable 969 years down to a normal human lifespan over the course of generations. But even in the borrowing of this lessening of the world idea, Tolkien is intentional. It's more powerful in Tolkien's work than in some of the later works that derive from Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien isn't just using it because it's a cool idea, but rather because of how it interweaves with some of his other themes. In this book, greatness is leaving the world, and we're supposed to feel a sorrow for what's being lost. And yet, we have that central theme of generational passing, and a world where the greater generations left their problems for the lesser generations to solve. In doing this, he points out the lie to this idea of a great age, or, in a more modern parlance, the good old days. But at the same time, makes the reader realize that there is something being lost with the passing of this generation, that there are things worth preserving, worth fighting for, that those who came before us have built. qualities and ideals that we may lose if we don't consciously remember and try to preserve them. As Tolkien meanders through this first section, which he totally didn't have planned out when he began to write, by the way, it's clear that while he may not have had the plot down, these are the themes he wanted to explore. From the passing of the ring to the legacy of the Dark Riders, from Tom Bombadil to the Barrow Downs, from the introduction of Strider's quest for Rivendell and the Last Homely House. These themes of the passing of generations and the diminishing of the world are ever present in the first book of Lord of the Rings. And this theme, this decay of humanity, we'll see pervade in a lot of the dystopic and post-apocalyptic science fiction that we'll explore next season. But even when we talk about Dune in a few episodes, we'll have that sense of the things that were lost, and humanity struggling to become what it mythically once was. We'll also have the passing of generations come to the forefront in everything from Star Wars to the Red Mars series. But these are just a few of the themes that Tolkien gives us. So join us next week, my precious. As we march on to the Two Towers and discuss what sweeping ideas await us there.